All right, meanwhile, there are growing concerns that China is looking to deepen its ties in Afghanistan following the Biden administration's mishandled U.S. troop withdrawal from the war-torn nation.
And joining us now to talk about all of this is author of The Great U.S.-China Tech War, Gordon Chang. Good morning, Gordon. Great to have you with us today.
Good morning, Allison. Good morning, Tom.
Good morning.
Gordon, in a new political report, a former State Department official warns that the Taliban could sell data that has been left behind about U.S. military operations to China. Gordon, how much of a concern is this moving forward?
Oh, this certainly is going to happen because we know that the Taliban and China have had strong ties going back even before 9/11 and in the wake of that horrible event. And we know that China sold the Taliban arms, which were used to kill Americans and NATO forces. So these two organizations really are quite tight. And we can expect everything that the Taliban has will be for sale to China and will end up eventually in Beijing.
Gordon, it seems to me, and the president always is starting to talk about, legitimacy, and the Taliban they need to decide whether or not they want to be legitimate in the eyes of the world. I don't think they really care about that. I think that China is going to pay these folks off and say, hey, you're going to basically, we're going to close your budget gap. We're going to make sure that you're flush with cash, and you're going to make trouble, or you're going to help people to make trouble for the U.S. to keep them distracted from what we are doing in terms of advancing our own agenda. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the Taliban is worried about legitimacy, but it's worried about legitimacy among terrorists. For instance, it is concerned that it could lose fighters to ISIS. And the reason is that a number of militants are starting to question, look, how can you deal with China? And so there's a real concern that ISIS, for instance, will pick up strength in Afghanistan at the expense of the Taliban. And remember, the Taliban has a lot of enemies in Afghanistan. Although the Taliban is the strongest political element, it is nonetheless not the only one. And the Taliban is much more concerned about what terrorists in Afghanistan think than what the international community may think or decide about the Taliban.
Yeah, absolutely. Gordon, President Joe Biden, he remains confident in the nation's counterterrorism capabilities, not just in the Middle East, but around the world. Take a listen.
But the current environment looks very different than it did in 2001. And we have to meet the challenges we face today. We run effective counterterrorism operations around the world, where we know terrorism is more of a threat than it is today in Afghanistan, without any permanent military presence on the ground. And we can and will do the same thing in Afghanistan with our over-the-horizon counterterrorism capability.
He says that, but the Biden administration, they weren't expecting the Taliban to take over as quickly as they did. Do you really think that the president should be so confident right now about counterterrorism?
Well, absolutely not, because we're not going to have any visibility in Afghanistan. I mean, a lot of people will talk about the disadvantages of staying in country. But nonetheless, one of the important advantages was that we were making sure that it was not going to be used as a base for terrorism against us. And we also knew what was going on. And yes, Biden, I suppose, is right that the security environment is different now than it was 2 decades ago. But 2 decades ago, for instance, we didn't have ISIS. So, I tend to think that it might be worse than it was prior to 9/11. And I don't think President Biden was leveling with the international community or the American people about this.
Gordon, just one more thing before we have to go. Taiwan's foreign minister is accusing China of wanting to emulate the Taliban, saying that Beijing ultimately is going to be, if they make any moves against Taiwan, that they're going to be subject to crimes against humanity. Your thoughts on Taiwan actually coming out with a very strong statement there and pushing back against Communist China?
Yeah, the important thing here is that the government of Taiwan reflects what the people in Taiwan think. And the people in Taiwan don't view themselves as Chinese. In the most recent self-identification poll, which was published about 3 weeks ago, there was a record low 2.7% of the people thought of themselves as Chinese only. In Taiwan right now, you're going to have a government that's going to fight, and it's going to fight regardless of whether it has support from the international community or even from the United States, because people believe it's their home and they don't believe that they're Chinese.
Yeah, interesting. Gordon, don't you think that an increased role for China in Afghanistan would just further the divide relations between China and U.S.? Because obviously we don't have a good rapport with them right now, but now we're talking about this.
Yeah, absolutely, Allison. That's a great question. And the reason is there's going to be terrorism that will emanate from Afghanistan. China will be supporting the Taliban, which is going to be sponsoring terrorism. And we should be holding China responsible for its support of terrorists. We didn't do that in the Great War against terror. We haven't done that even after it. And so this is our fault for not holding China responsible.
All right. Well, Gordon Chang, always great to have you. You provide such great insight. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Allison, and thanks, Tom.
Hey, I'm Rob Finnerty. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please join the conversation in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, too. Hit the bell icon to be alerted to breaking news. And remember, there's a whole lot more on Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news network. Newsmax TV, we're real news for real people.